And so can we welcome Adrian Holloway? Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. It's great to be back with you guys. And for those of you who I don't know, I thought that I'd introduce myself now by just showing you 60 seconds of photos from my life. Would that be okay? This is just a bit of fun, yeah? Okay, you ready? First photograph, ladies and gentlemen, me as a baby. You can see here, ladies and gentlemen, that I was actually born with a receding hairline. You can also see, if you look very carefully, that I was born with a squint, which means that wherever you are seated in this room, at least one of my eyes is looking at you. Next photograph, me, age 7. As you can see, folks, I've really got a number of problems here. In fact, we could spend the whole morning going through them one by one, but just to choose one of my many problems, you can see what's happened here is that my mum has got out the old kitchen scissors, and she's tried to cut my fringe straight, but she's gone ever so slightly uphill. You see that? Next photograph, me in a band. Oh yes. Oh yes. When I was a student, I too was in a band. And Jim, standing on one side of me, Jim has a bit of a pout. Can you see his lips pouting? Yes? That's because Jim has been in a band before. Roddy and me, however, we haven't been in a band before, so we're just trying to look cool, you know, like you do. Next photograph, me on my stag day. Just to explain, if you're not familiar with this tradition, here in Britain, if you're a man and you want to get married, you first have to dress up as an ostrich jockey. And now I'm married to my wonderful wife, Julia, and we've got these 4 lovely daughters. So I am now 49 years into my journey through life. And probably all of us would agree that during the course of a typical 70, 80, 90-year life, probably all of us would agree that normally, usually there comes a moment. Now, granted, this moment may only last for 5 minutes, but at least for those 5 minutes, you and I ask this question: am I alive for a reason? I mean, I can see, talk, think, feel, I can have fun, but is there any purpose to life? For at least those 5 minutes, we ask, why am I here? I mean, for that matter, why is there anything here? How come there is something rather than nothing? Why did anything begin to exist? How come there's a universe with me living in it? How come there's a planet Earth with me living on it? You know, I just showed you some photos from my life. Well, you could take your phone right now and you could show me a few photos from yours, but once we've added those photographs together, does it mean anything? I mean, do our lives count for anything in the greater scheme of things, or are we actually really just meaningless bags of chemicals? I mean, is life ultimately pointless? And during these 5 minutes, when we're thinking about this huge question, along comes a 33-year-old man. Now, he is by far the most famous person who's ever lived, Jesus of Nazareth. And he looks you and me straight in the eye this morning and says, "You're not an accident. You're supposed to be here. You're alive for a reason." Jesus of Nazareth says there really is a loving God who always planned that one day you would exist. This loving God has brought you into existence deliberately, on purpose, in the hope of having a wonderful relationship with you. This is a relationship which is good for this life, but it's so good that it goes on into the next life, into a place where you'll never be bored, a place where you'll be filled and thrilled to the max. This is a place where every day is better than the one before. Jesus says you're that loved by God. Now that is quite a claim. What are we going to make of this amazing claim? Well, what happened to me? My story is that I didn't go to church. In fact, I didn't have any friends who went to church. But then, rather out of the blue, I was invited along to a church which is very much like this church. And I had lots of questions. And one of my questions was this: hasn't science buried God? And this morning, I'd like to explore this question in terms of the journey that I went on and some of the questions that I asked along the way. This book that I'm holding is the personal story of a scientist, a geneticist called Francis Collins. It's his story of how he converted from atheism to Christianity. It's the story of how halfway through his academic career as a scientist, Collins became a follower of Jesus. And after he had become a Christian, halfway through life, Collins was appointed director of the Human Genome Project. And in April 2003, he announced to the world that he had successfully mapped the entire human genome, one of the most astounding scientific advances of all time. Has science buried God? Well, clearly not in the opinion of the many leading scientists, like Francis Collins, who believe in God. These people see no trade-off between believing in God and doing science for a living. Or how about my friend Keith Fox? Keith is professor of biochemistry at Southampton University. He's one of the UK's leading biologists. And Keith is part of a church which I've spoken at, a church very much like this church. At Keith's church, he leads a group called Reasonable Faith. Or how about Christine Dunn? Christine is a convert from atheism to Christianity. Chris is professor of physics at Durham University. And she's married to one of the elders of Emmanuel Church Durham, which is a church very much like, in fact, related to this church. Christine's also a friend of mine, and she leads the Alpha course at her church. Now, there's a long list of people, a long list of scientists like this. These are outstanding scientists who are also keen Christians. And they would all say that juxtaposing science and God as opposites is a category mistake. Now, what do they mean when they talk about a category mistake? Well, let's imagine for a moment that I decide to make a cup of tea. And then let's imagine that while the kettle is boiling, scientists Kelvin and Joule discover the precise mechanism whereby heat is turned into boiling water. So, we now know how the water boiled. We have discovered the mechanism. But it would be a mistake to say that because we've discovered the mechanism, I don't exist. It's a mistake because you could still quite accurately say the reason the kettle boiled is because I wanted to make a cup of tea. To say, we've discovered the mechanism, therefore, Adrian Holloway doesn't exist, that would be a category mistake. So we don't need an adversarial either-or explanation. And it actually seems as if most people in Britain agree with this. A European Commission poll found that 78% of people in the UK believe in God and or the supernatural. These are the very same British adults who have more scientific knowledge than any preceding generation. So it seems that even in this modern technological age, actually, most British people don't see science and God as enemies. They don't see it as an either-or. Most people actually do see science and God as a both-and. Now, having heard this kind of reply, the reply that you're hearing at the moment, I then responded by saying, okay, look, maybe you're right. Maybe science hasn't buried God, but come on, I said. As we discover more and more through science, the Bible's version of events does look increasingly unlikely. Yes? Well, that is certainly not the case when it comes to the origin of the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe, and the origin of organic life. So let me see if I can explain what I mean. Okay, firstly then, folks, regarding the origin of the universe. Up until the late 1920s, atheists used to argue that the universe was eternal. Just accept it, they said. It's always been there. They used to argue in that way because at that time, the universe was thought to be locked in a static, steady state. Then, an American astronomer called Edwin Hubble took a series of photographs in 1929 which proved that the universe is not locked in a static, steady state. We can see a photograph of him here. Hubble saw that the other galaxies are moving away from us and also from each other. And the easiest way for us to visualize what Edwin Hubble saw through his telescope is to use a balloon. Now, imagine with me for a moment that these stars on my daughter's balloon are actually galaxies. What Edwin Hubble saw when he looked through his telescope in California is that the galaxies are moving away from each other, and they're also moving away from us. And wherever we look in the universe, this is what's taking place. So, the conclusion is that if the galaxies are moving away from us and from each other, cosmologists concluded the universe is expanding. And if the universe is expanding, scientists concluded that in the past it must have been much smaller than it is today. In fact, they concluded that at one time the universe must have had a beginning. And then in 1965, these two men, Robert Wilson and Arno Penzias, discovered some background radiation in the universe that was left behind by this beginning moment. Now, this radiation is like a signature left behind by this beginning moment. So today, there is an overwhelming scientific consensus that at one time, the universe did have a beginning. Now, this was a huge blow to atheists because they could no longer argue that the universe had always been there. Folks, this is a really good example of a scientific discovery that has made it easier to believe in God, because this beginning moment does look like Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, where God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Let me put the same thing to you a different way. Imagine if I said to you that 13.7 billion years ago, there was absolutely nothing. And then, a fraction of a second later, there was a huge purple carrot the size of Chafford 100. The sudden appearance of the huge carrot would demand some sort of explanation. You see, it's not that matter and energy exploded into an already existing space-time universe. No. Space and time themselves began to exist at this beginning moment. Space, time, matter, and energy all began to exist at this beginning moment. We now know that the universe did come into existence suddenly out of nothing. And this discovery supports the second step of a simple case for the existence of God. Step 1 says that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Now, this sounds reasonable. Hey, we don't know of any exceptions to step 1. Step 2 says that the universe began to exist. And as we've just seen, actually, this is the reigning scientific orthodoxy today. Today, this is the standard model. The conclusion necessarily follows that the universe has a cause. Something or someone that exists outside of time and space caused the universe to come into being. Let me just finish this point with a funny story. Funny story about a friend of ours. My wife and I have got a friend called Angela, and she lives in the same village in Surrey where my wife's parents live. And this is a village, it's very kind of rural, and they have one bus a day. So our friend Angela is waiting for the daily bus at the bus stop. And it's a cold, snowy day, and looks like the bus is delayed, or perhaps it's even been cancelled. There's a couple of other women at this bus stop. They're waiting for the buses while Angela's trying to keep warm. And she's just about to give up and go home and write the whole thing off as a disaster, when at that moment, a car pulls up and stops at the bus stop. There's a woman driving this car. She winds down her window and she calls out, "Do you want a lift?" Angela thinks, I really do want a lift. I'm pretty cold and I do want, yeah. So Angela gets into the car. The other two women who are waiting at the bus stop, they get in as well, yeah? So picture the scene. This woman then pulls away, driving her car away from the bus stop. She's got 3 women on the back seat. There's Angela in the middle. There's a lady that Angela doesn't know on her right-hand side. There's another lady that Angela doesn't know on her left-hand side. But the thing is, Angela says, there was no conversation. Silence. The 4 of them going along the road, no conversation for 5 minutes. 5 minutes later, they've now been driving along for 10 minutes, and still no one has said anything. And then the lady on Angela's right-hand side, she starts talking to the driver. It's obvious these 2 women already know each other. And then the lady on Angela's left-hand side, she joins in the conversation. It's obvious she also knows the driver, and she also knows the lady on Angela's right-hand side. And that's when the horrible, dawning realization comes to Angela that what must have happened here was that this lady was driving her car along the road, and as she passed the bus stop, she sees 2 of her friends. So she stops her car and she winds down her window and she calls out to her 2 friends, "Do you want a lift?" And as her 2 friends get into her car, this random other person gets into the car. But because they were British, because they hadn't been introduced, they just drove along in silence. Oh, this is all very awkward. There's a random person in the car, but we haven't been introduced, so let's just drive on. But you see, the thing is, although that was a kind of a socially awkward moment for Surrey folk, none of the women in that car thought that Angela had come into existence for absolutely no reason at all. None of them thought that Angela had just happened. No. Why? Because everyone in the world bases their life on the law of cause and effect. So to get a universe out of nothing, you need a cause. And a cause that is capable of bringing space, time, matter, and energy into existence, hey, you could call that first cause God. So anyway, I looked at the origin of the universe. Next, the fine-tuning of the universe. Now, we know that if we were just 5% closer to the sun, we would fry. We know that if we were 5% further away, we would freeze. There wouldn't be any life on Earth. We know that our solar system just happens to be in what astronomers call the Goldilocks zone of our Milky Way. This is in between the Sagittarius and Perseus spiral arms. Maybe you can see the little yellow letters there, which shows us where the sun is. This is a rare, safe place in the Milky Way. Also, of course, where you are. But the degree of fine-tuning that we are talking about when we are talking about the origin of the universe is far more impressive than any of this. Because way back at the beginning of the universe, there is an explosion which causes matter to fly outwards, but it flies outwards at a perfectly controlled speed. You see, too fast an expansion and nothing would ever settle down. There wouldn't be a universe. So the universe expands, but the speed of expansion turns out to be critical, because if it's slowed down too much, the universe just collapses back on itself, and it never gets going in the first place. Folks, if the rate of expansion 1 second after the beginning moment had been smaller by even 1 part in 100 million billion, the universe would have recollapsed before it ever reached its present size. And the speed of the expansion of the universe is controlled by something called the cosmological constant. This is the energy density of empty space. Therefore, the cosmological constant cannot be just any old number. No. In order for life to exist, the value of the cosmological constant, which is 4 up from the bottom of this screen, that number has to be fine-tuned to a very precise number. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. It is not just the cosmological constant. All 20 of the values on our screen, all 20 numbers, all 20 values have to be just so. Otherwise, no humans, no people would ever have existed. Even the tiniest variation, either here or there, makes all the difference. Maybe I can give you a funny illustration of this point. Now, I wonder whether you could perhaps just do me a favor. This is a bit of fun to make this point. Could you all just, for a moment, just look this way, and I'm going to ask you, if you wouldn't mind, to vote on something. We're going to have a show of hands in a second. So first of all, could you please raise your hand if you think that I have got a criminal record? Could you please raise your hand? Okay, there's a hand up straight away at the back. Lady on the back row is absolutely convinced. Another guy, okay, not very much, a few hands. Okay, jump over here. All right, a few hands. Hands down, thank you very much. And now, could you please raise your hands if you think that I have not got a criminal record? Could you please raise it? Oh my goodness, vast majority. Okay, hands down, thank you very much. Folks, the truth is that actually I have got a criminal record. Now, the people who put their hands up are pleased, yeah. So, this is the truth. The truth is that on the 14th of November, 1988, I was arrested for alarm, distress, and willful obstruction of a highway. I can see some of you are interested. I will tell you about my crime, yeah? But what was really quite exhilarating was the manner of my arrest, the way that I was arrested. Because I was arrested, I was on foot and the police were in the car, and so I was running away from the police car, which was chasing me. So the lights are flashing, sirens are blaring, I'm on foot, they're in a car. So I run across these 2 roads, I'm running away from the scene of my crime. And I think, well, how can I escape the car? Jump over a fence into a muddy field. Car can't go through the fence. So I jump over this fence, the police car screeches to a halt, these 2 coppers fly out the back of the car, they jump over the fence, and now I'm running as fast as I can up this muddy hill like this, going through this field, and the police, I can hear the quicker of these 2 coppers closing in on me. I'm in a police chase. So I'm running as fast as I can. He's getting closer. I'm running as fast as I can. He's getting closer. And then eventually, he does this excellent rugby tackle on me from behind. And I go bang, face down in the mud. And I'm lying there in the mud thinking to myself, that was cool. I mean, they must practice that, don't you think? 1 minute, I'm in full speed. The next, bang, face down in the mud. So I'm lying there, face down in the mud. And of course, like you would, I'm thinking through all the cop TV shows that I've watched growing up. And as you know, what happens on telly at this point is that the policeman says, "You're Nick, Sonny Jim." Do you know? He actually said that. I was so delighted. So I stood up and I said, "Officer, I really want to thank you. It was really quite exciting. You know, the sirens and the lights and the chase. I'm from Wimbledon. This is really quite exhilarating." And then, of course, as you know, what happens on TV is that when you get arrested, they put your arm up your back like that. He did that as well. So now I'm being marched back to the squad car like this. And as you know, what happens on TV is when the arrested person is put in the back of the car, yeah, one of the policemen puts their hand on your head and they push you down as if you've never got into the back seat of a car ever before. So he pushes me down. I'm in the back of the car, and so I go down the station. I empty out my pockets, yeah? And so I'm put in the cells, and I'm arrested. Now, it might be that there's one or two of you here, and you are wondering, what was the alarm? What was the distress? What was the willful obstruction of a highway? Well, I have to confess to you that I was a student at the time. And what had happened was that I was going back to this college where I lived at the time, and as I was going home, I noticed quite a big group of about 20 of my friends from my college. They got hold of a big felled tree, and they were moving this tree to block the entrance to a rival, and in our opinion, inferior college. And so I naturally joined in, because at that time in my life, I genuinely believed that this other college was of no public benefit anyway. So I thought it was a good thing to block access to this other college, so I joined in. And of course, what happens next is the flashing blue lights appear in the distance, and all my mates scarper. And I remember thinking, no, you don't need to run away. We're students. This is obviously a student prank. The police are reasonable people. I'm from Wimbledon. I'll be able to reason with these people. But when the police car got really close, I thought, no. Probably this is wrong. Probably this will turn out to be alarm, distress, and willful obstruction of a highway. And so because I was the last to leave the scene of my crime, I was also the easiest to catch. Folks, if I had run away 2 seconds earlier when all my mates ran away, I would never have been arrested. But I didn't. I stayed for those 2 seconds, then ran, and that's why I was arrested. Those 2 seconds made all the difference. What we are talking about right now is the difference between our universe existing and nothing existing, the difference between those two things coming down to a far smaller variable than those 2 seconds. Roger Penrose, this is the man who helped develop our current understanding of black holes. He worked out the chances of entropy. Entropy is the amount of order that there is when the universe begins that subsequently decays, yeah? The chance of us having the amount of entropy that we actually did have, that chance, he worked out, is 1 chance in 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a number that has got more zeros on the end of it than the total number of particles in the entire universe. But that number has to be just so, otherwise we wouldn't be here. Entropy, folks, is just one of the 20 factors. All 20 have to be just so for us to be here. So question, why is our universe so unlikely? Answer, because of the number of competing forces that have to be perfectly balanced in the earliest seconds of the universe's existence. It turns out that gravity and electromagnetism have to just, bing, exist. But not just exist, they have to be finely tuned to each other. The same's true of matter and antimatter, the same's true of neutrons and electrons, the same's true of the strong and the weak nuclear force, and so the list goes on. Any messing with any of the numbers in the column that says value in our universe, and we wouldn't be here. There'd either be no universe or there would be no life. Let's take gravity, for example. Now let's imagine, just for a moment, that this tape measure was enormously long. So long that it actually stretched from one end of the universe over here all the way over to the other side of the universe over here. If it did, it would genuinely reflect or represent the possible range of values that gravity could have had in the universe. Okay, we've got the smallest possible value for gravity over this side of the universe. We've got the biggest possible value for gravity over this side. Now let's imagine, folks, that the value of gravity is currently set here on Earth, yeah? Now, let's imagine that I want to increase the strength of gravity on Earth by just a tiny amount, just from here, 2.5 centimeters from here to here, on this vast scale. Folks, scientists have discovered that this tiny increase from here to here would actually have increased the strength of gravity on Earth 1 billion-fold. It would have meant that there would never have been any life on Earth. This tiny increase from here to here would have meant that planet Earth would have had a maximum diameter of just 12 meters. In other words, planet Earth would never have been any bigger than this room. That's gravity. But actually, all the numbers on the screen all have to be just so in order for us to be here. In fact, scientists have calculated, taking 2 of the 20, that they're fine-tuned to each other to a precision of 1 part in 10 to the power 40. Now, how can we visualize a 1 in 10 to the power 40 chance? Well, conveniently for us, astronomer Dr. Hugh Ross from Toronto University, he's got a famous illustration of the 1 in 10 to the power 40 chance. This is what he says. Imagine a continent the size of North America. Then cover that continent with small coins and pile your coins up so high that your coins reach 236,000 miles up into the sky, which incidentally is the distance from our planet to the moon. He then says, take an additional 1 billion other continents, also the size of North America, and cover these other 1 billion continents again with small coins, and again pile your coins up 236,000 miles into the sky. Yeah? He says, then take an additional 1 coin, but this time paint your 1 additional coin red. He says, then hide your 1 red coin somewhere in one of the 1 billion piles, all of which are the size of North America, all of which reach 236,000 miles into the sky. Once you've done that, he says, find a member of the public and ask them whether they would like to participate in a scientific experiment. If that person says yes, you then blindfold them and you say, pick a coin, any coin. You can pick any coin from one of the 1 billion piles, all of which are the size of North America, all of which reach 236,000 miles into the sky. The chance that this person will pick out the 1 red coin first time is a 1 in 10 to the power 40 chance. Folks, that's what we need for just 2 of the values on our screen to be fine-tuned to each other as they currently are. But in order for you and me to be here to talk about it, all 20 have to be fine-tuned. Folks, I reached a point where I realized that in any other area of my life, I would never accept chance or sheer luck as the best explanation for the facts which are in front of us. Next, thirdly, the origin of organic life. Now, to get into this, maybe I can just tell you about a funny thing that happened to me actually watching the World Cup, watching football on television. Now, what I'm about to say, for those of you much younger than I am, will actually be difficult for you younger ones to imagine. But I want you to know that when I was growing up here in England, every 4 years, when the Football World Cup came around, I want you to know that everyone in England genuinely thought that England would win the World Cup. Hard to imagine, I know. I mean, the truth is that deep down in our hearts, we knew really that England wouldn't win the World Cup. We knew that we would be knocked out on penalties. But in that wonderful year of 1990, when England reached the World Cup quarter-final, this was England versus Belgium, and we were all crowded into the bar, and we're all watching the football, watching England play on the big screen. Everybody's crowded, there's people all around. I can tell you, the score was 0-0, going into the final minute, the final 60 seconds of the game. I can tell you that as David Platt swiveled to volley the ball into the net for the winning goal, as the ball crossed the line, as the ball hit the back of the net, in that moment, I kissed people who I'd never met. What a moment that was to be alive. Italia 90. There is something about life which is exciting. And if each of us now were actually able to see our DNA sequence right now, we would be blown away by the complexity of the information that is stored in each and every one of our cells. We're now going to watch a video. And the lovely thing about this video is it gives us a chance, with the benefit of computer animation, to see this remarkable system at work. I'm just going to wait for the animation to start. Okay, we're underway. You just want to kill the sound, and I'm going to voice this over. Okay. After entering the heart of the cell, we can see the tightly wound strands of DNA, and these are storehouses which contain the instructions that are needed to build every protein in an organism. And then, in a process known as transcription, something remarkable happens. There is a molecular machine which unwinds, can you see it there? Unwinding the DNA helix to expose the genetic instructions that are needed to assemble a specific protein molecule. Then what happens next is another molecular machine copies, can you see it? Copying these instructions to form a molecule known as messenger RNA. And when this process of transcription is complete, this slender RNA strand carries the genetic information through the nuclear pore complex. This is the gatekeeper for traffic in and out of the cell nucleus. Then, the messenger RNA strand is directed to a two-part molecular factory. This thing is called a ribosome. And after it attaches itself securely, this amazing process of translation begins. Inside the ribosome, a molecular assembly line builds a specifically sequenced chain of amino acids. These amino acids are transported from other parts of the cell, and then they're linked into chains that are often hundreds of units long. And it's their sequential arrangement that determines the type of protein that is being manufactured. And remember, all of this is determined by your unique genetic DNA code, that code that was embedded in that double helical structure way back at the start of our video. Now, when this chain is finished, it's moved from the ribosome into this barrel-shaped machine, and in here, it's going to be folded into the precise chain shape that will be critical for its function. And it is, of course, amazing to think that while you're watching this on the screen, exactly this is happening in your body on a microscopic scale, even as we're watching it being animated on the big screen. After this chain is folded into a protein, it's then released and then shepherded by another molecular machine, which turns up, and it's taken, can you see it? It's being taken to the exact location where it's needed. Amazing. Now that is a cell today. But even the most basic or primitive cell that scientists have ever been able to imagine, even that cell contains information in a code. So the code and the means of translating the code are both needed from the word go. One of those things is useless without the other. So here's the mega question. Where did the information come from in the first ever living cell? I've listed on the screen some of the newly discovered barriers that we found. Suffice to say, we don't have a viable, naturalistic explanation for how life started on Earth. In fact, with each passing decade, the problem of getting life from non-life increases. So, folks, we're out of time. Let's now try and draw some of the threads together as we come into land. Nothing that I've said this morning proves that God exists. But if you were to look for the inference to the best explanation, then when you look at the origin of the universe and when you look at the fine-tuning of the universe, and when you look at the origin of biological information, in all three cases what seems to be needed is a transcendent, intelligent first cause. And you could call a transcendent, intelligent first cause God. So it's clear that actually science hasn't buried God. God's existence is a reasonable explanation for the existence of the universe and for the existence of life. Okay. What about Charles Darwin's famous theory of evolution? Well, evolution begins with the entire universe already in existence. Evolution has nothing to say about how the universe started or how life began. So let's be clear about how limited the scope of evolutionary theory actually is. Biological evolution does not even start until the universe has already existed for 10 billion years. How did the universe get here? Why did it begin to exist? Evolution doesn't even address those questions. Evolution begins after you've already got our universe, after you've already got planet Earth, and after you have already got a single-celled organism living on the surface of our planet in the ideal conditions. So I think it's obvious that evolution could be true and God still exists. At least it would be a mistake to say, because evolution has happened, God does not exist. That is the mistake that Richard Dawkins makes. That is the category mistake that we started with. I just want to say something very briefly about three different Christian responses to evolution. And as I do, maybe the band would like to come up and join me. First Christian response is usually called young earth creationism. This is the view that says that actually the earth is young. It's only around 20 to 30,000 years old, and it was actually created within 6 24-hour days. This view says that common descent, evolution between species, has not taken place. And if you want to find out more about this view, you could look on the internet at Answers in Genesis. A second alternative view is called old earth creationism. Now this view, in contrast to the first, actually accepts the scientific consensus today. The scientific consensus says that the universe is 13.7 billion years old, that the earth is 4.5 billion years old. But this view agrees with the first view in saying that evolution between species, common descent, has not taken place. If you want to find out more about this second view, I would recommend Reasons to Believe, or reasons.org. A third view is called theistic evolution. This view differs significantly from the first two in that it says that actually common descent evolution between species actually has taken place. This view says that God kind of supervised or guided the process either to a greater or a lesser extent. And to find out more about this view, you could look at biologos. Now, folks, all three of these views are taken by sincere Christians who want to take the Bible seriously. Obviously, they do interpret the early chapters of the book of Genesis differently. Now, in this church, you will probably find all three of these views represented somewhere, and in fact, you'll probably find a couple of others as well. So you might be asking, okay, what is the bottom line? Well, the bottom line must be that some of the world's leading scientists are Bible-believing Christians. So no one here is being asked to throw their brain out of the window. None of us are being asked to commit intellectual suicide. Evolution used to be the big question. It's no longer the big question because of all the evidence we've found in the past 20 years for the fine-tuning of the universe. The big question now is, why is there a universe that's got life in it? Why have we got a fine-tuned universe? Because every other circumstance rules out life. Every other scenario rules out life. Life is the least likely thing we would expect to find. Yet what do we have? We have a universe fine-tuned in such a way as to make advanced organic life possible. Why? Why on earth would that be? That is now the big question. Lastly, we might wonder, hey, if God has gone to all this trouble to create our fine-tuned universe, and he's gone to all this trouble to create life, you'd almost expect that this God at some point would want to communicate to his creatures. All the Bible is saying is that that is what was happening through Jesus of Nazareth. And for me, folks, finding out that there really is a loving God and getting to know him personally through trusting Jesus Christ, that has been the single greatest discovery of my life. Thank you very much for listening to me. It's been great being with you. Thank you.
Great. Wasn't that great? You know, we have such an amazing God. And we come to worship the Creator, not the created. Paul says in Romans, I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God for the salvation for everyone who believes. Guys, we have got good news. And we can trust the good news because it's all about Jesus. And Jesus is the Creator.